Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mina Hinkle, and I'm the event coordinator here at the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center. It's my pleasure to present tonight's artist and curator conversation for our current exhibit, We Feel Our Way Through When We Don't Know. Admission for this program is pay as you wish. If you would like to donate to the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center at any time during the program, you may do so on our website. You will also find information about membership on that page. You are welcome to ask questions during the duration of the event. We ask that if you are on Zoom, you use the Q&A button on your screen. And if you are watching on Facebook Live, please comment your questions and we will get them to our artist and curator. At this point in time, I would like to welcome our curator and artists to turn on their microphones and cameras and join me on screen to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'll start and then I guess I will pass it to the next person and we can pass it till we get all the way through. My name is Michael Jevon Demps, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to have curated this show. I am an artist and professor at RISD, and I'm really honored to be here tonight. I'd like to pass it to Cheeny.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cheeny Celebrado-Royer. I am also an artist, and Michael and I teach in the same institution, Rhode Island School of Design, and I am based in Providence, Rhode Island. I will pass it to Oscar. I'm sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rene Cornejo, or Oscar Rene Cornejo. I am an artist and participating in the show. Thank you, Michael, for inviting me. I'm also an assistant professor at the Cornell AAP program, and I'm glad to join you here. And Lachell Workman. Or Gerald.
Thanks, Oscar. My name is Gerald Sheffield, a visual artist, and I am currently in Poughkeepsie, New York. I will pass it to Vessna.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to be here with this group of artists. My name is Vessna Scheff, and I'm an artist based in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And I will pass it to Lachell.
I know Lachell just ran away.
Cool.
But yeah, when Lachell gets here, we'll introduce. Oh, there you are. Hi, Lachell.
Everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lachell Workman. I am an artist originally from Bridgeport, Connecticut, still based in Connecticut. I am also a full-time faculty member at Purchase College, where I teach sculpture. You can't tell by most of them covered in. And I'm tremendously excited to talk about this show. Thank you again to Michael for presenting this to all of us. It's been a really great way not only to talk about this work that's kind of come out of the past few years, but to also like engage with community where many of us as artists have maybe felt distance from that for an extended period of time. So I'm really excited about this.
Awesome. Thank you, Lachell. And so, like I said, my name is Michael, and I didn't say that I'm also based in Providence. What I would like to do to start us off is read this curatorial essay. I think that in light of some of the things happening, for me, I haven't actually had a chance to read it out loud and activate it. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to do that. Before I get started as well, I'd like to apologize in advance to everybody present. My technological skills aren't always the best, so I might fumble through some screen sharing and showing you some images. So I just ask for some patience, we working it out. And with that being said, I'm gonna share some images with you as I read this essay, and then we'll jump into some conversation. Cool. So We Feel Our Way Through When We Don't Know features the works of Mariel Capanna, Cheeny Celebrado-Royer, Oscar Rene Cornejo, Vessna Scheff, Gerald Euhon Sheffield II, and Lachell Workman. Feeling is a mode of study through which we can understand both our internal and external experiences. A gut feeling describes an inner intuitive experience used to maneuver many kinds of circumstances. Joy, wonder, fear, doubt, and grief are all emotional responses to external events that we carry and process as a part of our interior life. To physically feel something is to experience this thing through touch. As we come to know objects and materials through touch, we become better aware of ourselves. With environmental collapse, socio-political upheaval, and effects of global health crises ever present in our daily life, what opportunities do we create to slow down, feel, reflect, reimagine, and recuperate together? This exhibition is motivated by that question, with the understanding that one constant of the human experience is change. In The Parable of a Sower, Octavia Butler wrote, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change." Brought to fruition with a sense of urgency, this exhibition is a survey of 6 artists who are invested in making work that asks deep questions about the transitory nature of being and the internal and external realities of the human experience catalyzed by change. Each artist's contribution demonstrates a particular set of visual strategies centered on forms of abstraction and material processes used to realize these works. Fluidity and stain, landscapes built from accumulation of active marks and tape, logic systems colliding with acrylic medium on a surface, and meticulously selected materials assembled into objects to hold the spirit of a place and or memory are just some of the moments present to behold. Each work serves as an example of commitment, resourcefulness, and resiliency made through touch and in return touching us. The space and conversation generated by bringing this diverse group of voices and perspectives are not intended to be a prescriptive reprimand, but instead an offering. This offering invites us to commune together and contemplate a way to compose ourselves, connect, emerge with strength in the face of uncertain and rapidly changing world. So I'm just going to keep going through some of these real quick. Also, as I'm going through these, I'd like to offer up to our audience, this is more of an informal conversation. So if you have questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat, and we will respond to them in the best way that we can as we go forward. I'm going to show a couple more. So as I'm getting through here, I kind of want to pose a question to the group. So as you know, I have a relationship with all of you, and something that you might not know because I haven't talked to you about this individually is that not only as an artist do I respect your artistry and your practices, but also how you all play roles in a community, and how it seems like there is an essence of community in the way that you move in your practice. And so I kind of just want to put that in the air. Does anybody want to speak to the importance of community on your practice? And just jump in, y'all.
Can you show the show slower again?
Yeah, am I going way too fast? Thank you for saying that. I'm probably going way too fast.
Well, it's a request from the attendees.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think life is about relationships, and I kind of found myself and saw myself starting very early through the community, how they see me or how I think I'm being seen. And at some point, art or making, which is process, made me realize a lot of things about myself by slowing down that were very generative and important as far as healing or finding one voice. And I'm not a doctor or a lawyer. I really cared about certain themes, especially as being first generation Salvadoran American, of seeing the pain or hurt that I felt growing up, and then finally being able to hear articulated as an adolescent. I was like, how can I contribute back to the community in a way that heals? And making was one of those ways. So I started very young in my formative years, undergrad years, going to the village from where my mom immigrated from, and just started sharing workshops of cultural workshops, art workshops, teaching what I know, and giving kind of a ground or temperature to maybe some of the historical archives that I was opening up through testimony. And I can't be here without that entire experience and without my community. And, you know, on a kind of larger scale, and then on a very intimate level, here we are, right?
Right.
Crossing paths and having this conversation. And I think the problems are when it gets compartmentalized. And so I think culture and art brings us together and makes it an inclusive experience versus an exclusive one through feeling, a gut.
Cheeny, can you jump in here? Because I know that we've been in conversations around some of this energy. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the Philippines, and when I think about community, I guess I tend to go back to the experiences that I had growing up. The Philippines experience was about 2 typhoons per month. So there's like bi-weekly kind of visits of these typhoons that have a variety of intensity. And so, community comes in when, before we experience a typhoon, of course, we tend to share materials that to help strengthen the architecture of our homes or our shelter. And then the aftermath of that. And so people coming together to kind of rebuild the town and just offer some help, like your neighbors or whoever, family, people who are around you. And so that's where my energy is coming from when I think about community. But I also feel like this show, like as Oscar has mentioned, has brought all of us together as artists, curator or people, and like whoever is seeing the show, to be able to just reflect and kind of process what grief, loss, resilience really look like for all of us. So yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in here? Well said, y'all. And while just, I want to take this opportunity to say that Lachell is having some technical difficulties. So we're gonna try to figure that out and invite them back into this conversation. But yeah, and so
I also, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I just want to also add that, like, here we are virtually, right? And back in the day, things could be provincial, and they can still be provincial, but I think we're now, it's very clear that there is a global community, and there is such a thing as like a world, like one could be mindful of how we occupy space and share space as a world citizen. And I think that goes back to kind of the reason I kind of collaborated with you in this show, is like the way we feel kind of starts to speak or point to embodiment. And where's the dissonance where we're performing certain values but we don't kind of like believe in some of those values, and how do you kind of close the gap? Um, um, and so back in the day, something could happen in an obscure part of a village and without no one knowing about it, maybe 10 or 15 years later or 20 years. I mean, there's still like unearthing Tulsa graves, right? And so
Right.
now something is happening and there's witnesses. And so what we're seeing is kind of an ancient way of sharing those testimonies and how we witness the world, but through making. And I think that that is, regardless whether it's like, you know, legible, whether it's representation or abstract, it's still material. No one doesn't have to go to school to have a relationship to color, to texture, to scale, right?
Yeah.
So
Now that's, you know, that's super well said, and definitely something that, and bringing you all together, and, you know, like, also as an artist myself, first and foremost, this idea of how these materials, like, how can we use materials in this way that's relatable, that isn't about a kind of like, I have to have a certain kind of education or understand a certain kind of language to experience what's present. You know, I think that all of you, in your own ways, are working in this way where you're using materials to really communicate. And, to me, it's just, even as somebody who brought you all together as the curator of the show, the ways in which these works came to be and how they showed up and like are in conversation with each other kind of has blown me away, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, with that being said, I'm like resting on this image, Vessna, of your work. And, you know, going off this kind of idea, I feel like, you know, when asking you to come and be a part of this, like, this is not what I envisioned that you would make, right? But like, you literally made a kind of place in the space, you know what I'm saying? And like, I wonder if you'd be willing to like speak about like how this came to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was thinking about the question of community also. I feel like that is there's so many meanings that takes on in different contexts, you know, that it takes me a while to kind of think through how I relate to the term, you know. And so, yeah, I appreciate the prompt because I think it's one that I like to keep coming back to, you know, like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be in community with? I was in a residency just recently that was 10 artists and it was a month long. So it felt very intimate, and that it felt like a relationship to understanding a type of community that can be built. But in reference to this installation, I feel like that comes into play. So I started off mostly with portraiture, and then as I was showing the works, the portraiture works, I felt like they needed a space to be in, that they seemed kind of alone on the wall without these other spaces that made them feel like home or something, that made them feel at home, and that for me gave them a context in which they could live and exist, and the context in which I experienced relationships to the people in the portraits. And so that is kind of how the installations have come into my work, as a place to create a home for the portraits, for the people in the portraits. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of things I'm thinking through in this moment, I guess. But yeah, I didn't grow up going to a lot of museums, and my relationship to making has often been in a home space, in an intimate environment where there's cooking happening, there's scents happening, there's sounds happening. And that's the context in which the work has developed and has often stayed. And so for me, I think being able to have that space be created where the works are installed is something I am thinking about with this installation.
Yeah. That's Mariel. Yeah. Amazing. What do y'all, I mean, I would love to hear, so something that I'm interested in this conversation, and I know that not everybody's had a chance as the artists to go see it yet, right? Like, I'm gonna take this real small opportunity to just say congratulations to Vessna, who had like a moment in life that's changing, you know what I'm saying? Like a very significant marker moment. And you know, I don't want to put all your business out there, but congratulations. And so I'm saying that to say, you know, not everybody has had a chance to see everything together, but I wonder, are there things for people who have had a chance to experience other folks' works in the space? Are there things that stand out to you or that are resonating with you or that you have questions about for each other?
I was just like blown away by how everything fit together in the space and it just worked and gelled together. I just spent so much time with everybody's work, even in the reception. So I think the flow of the work and how everything's placed was really impressive. And I mean, kudos, Michael. You really, helped put together a lot, and think that just the prompt itself was just, I was like, oh, I didn't have to think at all as you were explaining it to me. In the rough draft period, like earlier this year, you were like, hey, I'm thinking about this project. And you kind of went off of a few things. And I was like, oh, I'm already there. That's exactly where I was. So I think that, to kind of have that and to pull that together at this moment was, it was helpful for me. And I had a lot of fun working on the paintings for the show. And so it was great to kind of see the curation like complement that too.
Yeah. With that being said, Gerald, I'm actually going to ask you something about these works because, sorry, and again, I'm kind of jumping around y'all, and I know I kind of have I have a kind of outline, but I'm kind of just going off of what my spirit is telling me to do right now. So I'm sorry if it's not legible. Please, audience or my fellow panelists, if I need to slow down or if I'm not being legible, please let me know. But I'm kind of just feeling my way through this because I think one thing that I notice and feel from your works that are in this show, Gerald, is this idea of calling for rest or like making a place or like identifying a place and where rest is needed, right? And so, again, like as I asked you, when I asked you to be a part of this and like kind of, when we went back and forth about the ideas and stuff, like for those who don't know, like Gerald and I have like we've been friends for a minute now, and we shared a studio once upon a time. And so, Gerald is somebody who makes a lot of different kinds of work. You know what I'm saying? And so like I when inviting you into this show didn't expect this kind of work. You know what I'm saying? I feel like this is a pivot for you in a really dope way. And so I wonder if you could talk about this idea of like a place for rest and the kind of body of work that you're making now.
Right. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably like right at the heart of it. I had just been moving so often. I had been traveling a lot. And as you mentioned, like I've done a lot of different work, and even calling back to like the first question about community. Yeah, that was all involved with why I traveled so much and went to so many different places. But I think the last trip I took to Central Asia and then coming back, and then there had been a pandemic, it just overwhelmed me a lot. And it just, I had a time to reflect and ask myself questions of like what I was doing and, why was I, so transient and moving so often, and was it in service to my own personal mental health? And so I had to the pandemic kind of allowed me to slow down and ask those questions and check in with myself. And I think, so when I started, I mentioned in the description or in the audio description that it's part of a larger series titled Fables for Introverts. And it was a way for me to kind of just reclaim a space, rest as an active space. I think because, for so long, I think there's an assumption that just you have to speak and vocalize everything. And, I kind of stretched myself thin being a part of a lot of stuff. And so, coming back to rest was just a way for me to kind of heal. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it really comes through. And, there's something very interesting about this place and how the moments that you chose. Well, let me say it like this, the reason why I'm asking y'all about place so much is because there's, what I'm thinking about in this essay and in my practice is this idea of a kind of internal, interior space that we're kind of always working within and trying to navigate, and the external, concrete places that we're in or that influence us. And so like for me and, my history with you and thinking about the different kinds of work you make, there's something very interesting about the moments that you're choosing to show in these works and the differences in scale, right? And so like there's like this large painting that's actively showing rest, but then you chose to highlight specific moments, and how those moments show up, I think are super interesting, man. And so, yeah, I think that I say that to say, like, I feel like something that's important to me in my practice and, why I kind of look at y'all and the different kinds of works that you all are making have to do with like world building, actually. And like, how are we processing the world that we're in? What kind of things are we trying to like actively put into the world, and what are we trying to make around us, right? Which, both to me, for my practice and how I think, is about community and how to like energetically show up in the world. And so, I feel like all of y'all are doing that in a very interesting way. Lachell, I feel like this is a really good segue to your energy, and I'm trying to find it in the slides here, because also, something about all the artists in the show is that y'all all have kind of multiple ways in which you make things, right? All of y'all have like very diverse practices, and Lachell, and like, I know that you are making different kinds of things all the time too. And so I wonder if you could talk about how this idea of community and place factor into the work, not only that you're showing here, but the different kinds of work that you make.
Sure. So I think one thing that I've continued to think about that, even when you first reached out about this show and we were discussing community, and also the idea that you kind of develop these survival strategies that are very much connected to community, but also thinking about how those things have shifted within even the past 3 years. And one of the things that, I've always thought about in my work is just like this question around memorials, what kind of things we memorialize, what kind of even like ordinary like moments can we envision as being things that are important enough, that have enough value to be commemorated within like real space that people can gather around. And one of the things that kind of like exploded within this process is like the idea of memorializing loss. And I'm not even thinking about like just loss of people, which has of course been significant in the past few years, but even just like the loss of community as like we understand it, as it looks like, even as Gerald mentioned, the idea of traveling and being away has shifted. The idea of the needing to find place and needing to be connected when we're in this space where we have like this heightened, I think, anxiety around loss. One of the things that became really important in this process is that the idea of the memorial is even more significant now, because it's like for the first time we're experiencing what it even feels like to not be able to attend a funeral, right? To not engage with community. And I think, for me, that's been one of the most impactful moments that I've had within the past 3 years. And that's something that showed up in the studio in ways that were unexpected. Like I found myself like always thinking about like this experience of what it means to search for someone else to either be a sounding board or even someone just to sit in that same space. Like there's been like this real questioning around how you even navigate making multiple works, how you start to reconsider, is this something that even gives space to enter the work in ways that we've traditionally experienced, whether that looks like the gallery space or whether that looks like public space. And for me, like this work has made me reconsider the need for there to be some element of meditation that's allowed to happen within this, going back to rest and feeling like if I'm not performing that task, then there's no place for the community to meet, like whether that is in the studio, whether that is in like domestic spaces. And it's really interesting how like when we were all at the opening, the like masterful arrangement of the show felt like that. It felt like we were like coming into this work thinking about, is there going to be this space where this kind of connection can happen? Like how thinking about like how one navigates space physically and also how those conversations can happen. It's almost like this this additional like exertion of thinking about how you prepare for guests to come over, but then this idea that maybe no one is going to show up, but I'm still trying to prepare for that. Even in something like a Zoom call, right? I'm trying to think about like, how can I find something that's going to be adequate enough to serve the need of the community in this time where everything feels insufficient. And then going back to like traditional strategies like collaging and like breaking these things apart and dealing with fragmentation has become significant because it feels like that's what we've been working with. And in order to like preserve the space of community, in order to preserve the possibility, it feels like these strategies have become significant in ways that even I didn't consider in previous years.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. Oscar, I'm going to pull you into the conversation here because although you spoke, we didn't, I didn't delineate your work here. And I think there are elements that Lachell is talking about that I think very much resonate with ways in which you work too around community and the ways that you're making. And there's, something that I've admired about your practice since I've known you is how you're activating materials actually, and that like you're purposely choosing materials that are active, and like the details in which you work are kind of like gestures of paying homage. And so can you speak to that a little bit? I'm saying, like I know that I'm not doing it justice right now because I'm like emotionally reacting, but can you speak to this idea of both preservation and activation? Do you feel that present in how you move?
Yes. I mean, I feel like it's being expressed in many different forms through Vessna and Lachell and Gerard.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is where material comes in. I think it was one of the questions that, how I view materials. And I feel material is like another form of consciousness. It kind of reveals our relationship to the world and community. And so potentiality, right? I remember a good friend of mine and mentor talked about the potential of a material and how diverse it can be, like wood. It could distribute weight, it could harness fire, and it could also bludgeon someone, right? And so abstraction kind of works in that same way. I like to kind of create nuanced experience or enigmatic experiences where someone is trying to the mind is always trying to make sense of things. And sometimes that's not what it's for.
Mhm.
Sometimes like the mind is, a filing cabinet, as Prince would say. It's like it has its job, and sometimes what the mind does and it shifts over to the psychological space,
Yeah.
which has a lot of stuff underneath that we don't know, that gets reinforced through social conditioning, that we can just get triggered by, lights or commercials or a word. And so I try to kind of like slow down my relationship to materials and kind of, for instance, fresco. I kind of like how they were in speaking with Lachell's work, because I feel that fresco refracts light. Basically, fresco is painting like watered pigment onto fresh plaster, and it goes through a chemical transformation that transforms the water that's suspending the pigment into a crystal. And so if y'all know the Pink Floyd album cover, the light hits it and it creates this rainbow. I kind of imagine all these lights, which our vision, I feel, is like another form of light. It starts to kind of like get activated. And so that's what gives us a feeling in old places of the illuminated painting, because it's literally like light refracting within the surface. So a lot of these practices also were supposed to be meant to be seen under candlelight. It's another form of performance or technology of back in the day, that kind of gets lost through new technologies, right? And so it was very serendipitous. We didn't talk about this, but you put it in this kind of like low light place. So the projected light that creates an image with Lachell is, I feel, conceptually talking to the way light is operating on the surface here, where these like kind of thin, coal on the surface is showing kind of the crystallization of pigment that's ever so fragile, that can be literally wiped away. It doesn't really remove an image, it creates a new image through its removal. But then it also has this permanent image that can last thousands of years, which is the fresco. So that kind of fleeting moment to a fixed moment. However, if this object itself sweats in the right way, it can trap the coal. And that's what we see in like ancient caves, right? These kind of the sweat of the caves trapping these kind of drawings that people made. And so, yes, I feel that material's very much alive. That's how we enter the consciousness of what we think people were thinking in ancient civilizations, through the relationships of the material, right? And so they leave context clues. And so in the same way, I feel that like people have that same capacity to allow themselves to slow down and enter the work. And so here meditation comes into play. You only have 7 or 12 hours of painting time or 2 hours of painting time. The material tells you when it's done. And so there's this kind of participation. And so if I fetter too much or withhold my brush mark, it's drying up, it's dying. Each brush mark that I'm adding, I'm extending its life through the moisture of the mark. And so there's this kind of conversation happening with that. I started figurative and I went into the abstract because, as I mentioned earlier, I worked in post-conflict zones teaching. I felt that in the places that needed to heal from conflict, they needed to be in a psychological space and make work. And in that work is a reflection and awareness of themselves without fear of any repercussion. Like that's shitty work, or, you can't be talking about that. That's taboo. So you repress. And in first generation, post-Civil War, a lot of things were taboo and highly polarized. Things that people, when I was making the work 10 or 15 years ago, this would never happen in America, right? And so we see that kind of tension where literally people are not listening. They don't go by facts, they go by what they believe. And so I think material can be an entry point to speak to the body in something much deeper, and maybe start to like revisit our literacy towards images and literacy to material, and how they're wed together, harmonized, can maybe expose like some of the kind of contradictions that we embody in America.
Yeah.
And so last point I wanted to make maybe is, resilience that you maybe mentioned in the outline. I think it's like its etymological root is to recoil or rebound. And I think resilience comes in for me as like, I always thought about it like overcoming, and it came from a place of hurt. And I know that we've talked about trauma and memorial, but what I found profound about the show is how life affirming it was. It was generative. It's an embracement of life. It wasn't, poverty porn or trauma porn, right? And so I think that that's sometimes some of the hardest things in like kind of traumatized communities, that's all they know. So they refresh it. And, the power of, you talk about place could be like how we see ourselves as well, psychological space.
Yeah. Man, thank you for that. Yeah, man. I just need to hold that for a second. I think that's really real. And, this idea as an artist, Oscar, I feel like you said this a couple of times tonight, this idea of like, well, you haven't said it in this exact way, but the way that I hear it and think about it in relationship to my own practice is this idea that at the same time when we're processing these kinds of feelings of emotions in our work, we get put in a category, or we limit ourselves and put ourselves in a category that isn't necessarily only about life affirming. And then it kind of puts us, I have felt in the past, kind of locked into a zone where it's like, well, I'm not speaking for my identity only. I'm trying to, or maybe even at all, I'm trying to ask deeper questions or think about deeper things. And so I know that Cheeny and I have actually had this conversation literally last night over dinner and drinks. This idea that when we're working with subject matter and feeling that is so close to us, how much distance as artists and communicators do we feel that we need to have, and then and then these ideas around like capitalizing off of a kind of trauma or re-traumatizing communities in which we're coming from, speaking to things that people have already lived, you know what I'm saying? How do we process that? And so I think the way that you just expressed that is very powerful and inspiring, fam. And like, I feel like in ways all of us are kind of working through what these things mean to us individually in our practices. And so I'm looking at a question. I want to shout out Spencer Evans. He asked us a question, and then I want to come back to Cheeny because, again, I think a lot of the things that everybody is talking about is also very present in your work materially, Cheeny. So I want to touch back to that. But first, this is a question from Spencer Evans, who's here with us, and he says, could the artists talk about the moment you recognize the conversation that this collection of works was having with each other upon seeing the show for the first time? Also, did you notice anything new about your work when you saw it in context to the other artists' work? This is for everybody, anybody who wants to jump in. And I feel like there's been moments where people have touched on components of this, like Oscar, I know that you talked about the way that your work is meant to be seen in the light and how the light is working in that space with you on the show. But I wonder if anybody else who's had a chance to see it. I mean, I also, with that being said, I know Gerald talked about it too, but what else?
I mean, I think after I figured out who all was in the show, I just looked up everybody's work. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. I didn't have that pressure on me to make a statement to, you know, it had to be something provocative or anything. It was just like, oh, I know half the artists in the show already. And I'm familiar with this work, right? And so I think for me, it was just, you know, it just kind of relieved a lot of stress that I have had, you know, in past years, going into work and overthinking so many things. And I promise this is like, since undergrad, this is the first time I didn't overthink anything, and I just kind of had fun painting. So
Yeah. Cheeny, I'm gonna bring you in here again, only because, you know, out of everybody's work for this show, I feel like, you know, you were the person who I invited into the show the last, right? And because, you know, that came off of a wild studio visit that we had where I recognized that you made like several bodies of work over a short amount of time, and you were like processing at like a level at light speed, you know what I'm saying? And so for you, I wonder actually, you know, I'm really curious to hear about how you're responding to seeing your work in context, especially the scale of that work, right? And in relationship to like your studio spaces and how you've been changing studio spaces in relationship to like other people and what they're thinking about. I just wonder how you've been responding to that. I know we talked about it a little bit because we've been having dinner this week, but I'm just curious, you know.
Yeah, so my work is right next to Gerald's work. I don't know if you want to scroll through it so that we can get.
Yep. Sorry.
And I spent some time just kind of looking at Gerald's painting, the really big one. Yeah, that one. And so, you know, the way that I kind of read it was Gerald's painting was like the calm before the storm, or even like an external look of some sort of, like internal chaos or turbulence that's about to happen or is happening. And the way that I made this work, so this work is really big, probably one of the biggest works I've made so far in the two-dimensional format. And the architectural structure, the really thin lines are made out of tape. So those are temporal, much more temporal than the acrylic that's applied on top of the drafting film. And those were really hinting to the architecture that I had this summer while making this work. And the work is made out of acrylic paint and also flash paint. And I watered down a lot of that acrylic paint to try to break down the binder of the paint. And so, you know, talking about resiliency in terms of materials, that's really what I was trying to do, because I think about drawing a lot, and drawing is the kind of medium that offers, you know, automatically offers this like ephemeral or like temporal quality to it. And so I wanted to see how much the paint can sustain, or like how much the substrate, the drafting film could sustain in terms of trying to apply the watered down paint onto it. And so even though the work is not, or doesn't seem as fragile as it may be, the medium itself, every kind of scratch or scrape, or even like the presence of, you know, air around it is starting to kind of change its quality, its color, and even the texture that exists. And so some of the marks that I made in here also come from imprints of old drawings, old works that I cut out previously. And most of those drawings are made out of also the same substrate that this is on. So like drafting film, which has this like translucent quality to it. And so depending on what kind of background you put the drawing on, then it changes the quality of the colors and the light, and even what is being revealed in the piece or what's being hidden. Yeah, and like I thought about how my work related a lot to also like Lachell's work in terms of memorializing and loss or grief, and even Vessna's piece in terms of domesticity, and the way that Oscar was talking about how light affects his medium was also one of the factors, and even one of his pieces in the back that just felt like like you're facing an altar and you're just like kind of forced to reflect on something, or like just be at peace and be alone with the work. And so I don't know, I think that all the works came together really, really well, and I'm really happy to be able to just be in conversation with everybody. Did you want me to talk about this piece too? I'll let other people. We don't have a lot of time, so.
I do love the, it doesn't just stay there, but now I see the energy of the typhoon, like the fluidity moving through your composition, especially in the larger work. And I always see the tape as a moment of proposal also, or reconciling, which I think it shares a relationship to resilience. Because yeah, I looked it up. I was like, I have my own definition of resilience, but what would is source? And it says rebound and to recoil. So there is this moment of revisiting to jump forward. And I think reconciling is not to be in denial of some of these moments that can be very like hurtful or deep cutting, but to address it and see its whole movement. And so I think about like your work, Cheeny, introducing just like the formal language of movement and how that can shift over into conceptual connections of movement through all the works, moving through space and the different types of space.
No, I mean, I also looked up the definition of resilience in English. English is not my first language, so I'm always curious about like etymologies. And I mean, they talk about it in a very scientific way. And so like that idea of recoil, or like being able to bounce back, and even like mentioning how fast you can bounce back, it just doesn't seem as human as how we use that term. And so, but in Tagalog, it's katadagan ng loob, which tatag is like also translated as root. And so I think about it as, if your root is strong enough, you're not going to be able to be like driven or like what is it, like taken by the wind or any kind of movement all of a sudden. You can stand your ground essentially. And so it's I mean, I see it more as like inner strength. So yeah.
Sorry, y'all. I just switched our image energy from a certain set of install shots that I had to another one that I totally forgot that I had. And so I just want to there's some more different kinds of details of what's going on in the show present. Yeah. So I want to take this opportunity. Go ahead, Oscar. Go ahead.
No, I like that Cheeny mentioned the roots, because I think that feeling can start to make us aware of things that we didn't overtly see through slowing down. And for instance, like this piece that you're like kind of scrolling through, the kind of moment of abstraction of slowing things down in order to see the whole movement of things. Sometimes we fixate which goes back into my comment earlier that there's a lot of like pain that has moved us and towards healing, but we didn't stay there. We're also not denying it, and there's a lot of energy that's life-giving, and sometimes people would like us to focus on the scene of the crime, which is something that we all share, I think, as human beings, that like that kind of dissonance, that hurt, that pain, the trauma, and how you reconcile loss. But sometimes we focus on the leaves and the trees versus the root of the thing. And we chop off a branch, but then there's all these other problems. And if we can come to the root of why do we constantly revisit this moment of pain, and how do we like heal through those things, and how they're constant and repetitive as far as a rhythmic cycle, funerals, that we even take it for granted that we can, like, it took a pandemic to see like, dang, I can't even show up for my friend's funeral. Like, I have to like do a virtual meeting. And I think that's where like movement can come in. I think Lachell mentioned meditation, to be able to see the whole movement of trauma and pain. And there, in that movement, there's an after, the reconciling and coming through, and where resilience will make sense because you've overcome something. And so I think it's powerful to like give room for people that have been hurt, to give room to acknowledge it, not to be in denial and repress it, and then like move forward, heal by moving on.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it's almost 8 o'clock, which that time just flew by. I want to leave a little bit of space to see if anybody else has any questions who's out there in the world. Am I missing them? Community home. Okay, this is Eric DeLuca. Community home place. Memorial can become so rhythmic, quotidian, and turn into homogenic, oppressive, XYZ. Do y'all make work about these anchors to refuse the elements of them? And I actually just think that you touched on that fully, Oscar, and I appreciate that. Sorry, I didn't see that question. That was from a while ago. All right, so we're at about time, but I want to take this opportunity to say some things. First of all, I'd like to thank Sarah Freeman and Brattleboro Museum and Art Center for allowing me to have this opportunity to bring these works together. I'd like to thank Gerald, Vessna, Lachell, Cheeny, Oscar, and Mariel for working with me and trusting me and the vision to bring this show together. I highly respect all of you as artists and people, and you have all impacted me in real ways in my life. And so it's an honor to work with y'all and hold space with y'all and continue this conversation. I consider y'all like my art family before we make this show happen. And so, like I said, I'm honored that we can make this happen and share this conversation together and these works. I appreciate y'all world building with me. Thank you to everybody who's been here today, who showed up to participate and be present with us. Shout out to Spencer and Eric and everybody else present. I don't know if Mariel's out there or not. Mariel couldn't be with us because Mariel just had a beautiful baby. And so blessings and love to you and your family. Yeah, I don't know. Anything else, y'all?
I was going to say this idea, someone mentioned the term radical rooting. And I had come across this definition of radical, which was to change something by the root. And I think that's what I was feeling in a lot of the work, and also the way in which the show has come together. I feel like, Michael, you really move in that way. And to do something that is very grounded and rooted, and to express these moments that feel kind of very much by the root, moving things by the root, and being grounded in that way. That's kind of what was coming up for me as I was looking at the collection of works here. And I think about the undercurrent of that movement, that it doesn't have to be loud or big or kind of in your face or something, but it is very much this present force. And that's how I think about kind of the architecture that I see inside of people's work, is that there's this present force that is moving it forward. That just came to mind, and I wanted to share that. Thank you all for this.
Thank you.
I like that point, Vessna. And also something about you referring to the root. It also feels like in many ways, there's a different kind of consideration to audience with this. Like it feels like the audience feels like it feels like even like with your installation, there is something about pulling from like these kind of sources that seem to be connected to like some sort of original placement. And then one of the things I just wanted to mention, going back to the title of the show, which was the thing that I was initially not really excited about. I feel like excited is like is an understatement, but I felt so seen by Michael's title, this idea of feeling your way through and you don't know, and it kind of like connected back to this idea of thinking about like, where do these references come from? Who teaches us how to navigate through these things? And who also like teaches us to like know and understand that these are significant and valuable strategies to not only work through problems that we're exploring like in our art practices, but to navigate through these experiences that we're seeing for the first time in our lives, right? And the title of the show like continued like for me to go back to this idea of thinking about that in a real way, people are coming up with strategies for survival every day, but then they're like they're going through this process of transformation where, similar to what Oscar mentioned before, they're no longer things that are rooted in trauma, right? They're mechanisms that kind of like gain strength. It's almost like they go through this metamorphosis where they're not only ways of like working through, but they are strategies for coming back into the space and communing together, right? Like the idea of the installation, what it does, what it serves to refer to within a gallery space, but then even thinking about this relationship to like kind of like meditative space. It seems like there's like this significance that we're carrying from pulling from these limited resources that we have in moments of stress and trauma, and then letting those things be things that can sustain us, things that can like speak back to these ideas that they come from deficits, and they're now like real strategies that are rooted in joy, because I think joy is also sometimes like taken out of these moments that become so much about trauma, become so much about loss. And I think for me, that's like one of the most significant things that I've experienced with learning about those of you who I'm meeting for the first time and now absorbing like new people into community, that these are strategies that are also rooted in joy, and that we have a lot of agency in that resilience. It's like, so that's just something that I've continued to think about going back to this title.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank all of you for being here tonight and producing such a wonderful conversation for the museum and all of our viewers. On behalf of Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, thank you to all of our viewers for coming tonight. We hope that if you have not already, you are able to come in the coming weeks to see this exhibit. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thank y'all so much. Good night, y'all.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.